The 25 Most Amazing Paintings by Paul Gauguin. Number 25. Self-Portrait with Yellow Christ. From 1890 to 1891. On the threshold of his definitive departure from Europe, Paul Gauguin captured in Self-Portrait with Yellow Christ one of his most profound reflections on identity and transcendence. The work was conceived in a moment of isolation and crisis, where the artist confronted his own doubts through a symbolism that fuses his image with that of Christ. The presence of the Yellow Christ, inspired by a Breton relief that Gauguin had already immortalized in another painting, not only reinforces the spiritual dimension of the composition, but also suggests a personal identification with the figure of the martyr, in a kind of pictorial confession where suffering and redemption become central themes. The oil on canvas is characterized by an energetic stroke and a palette dominated by intense yellows and earthy tones, in a clear departure from naturalistic nuances. The two-dimensionality of the representation and the simplification of the volumes reinforce its symbolic charge, anticipating the path that 20th century art would take. Today, the work is in the Musée d'Orsay, where its magnetism has influenced generations of artists. Its radical focus on subjectivity and its fusion of portraiture and allegory had a notable influence on the German Expressionists, who adopted its use of color as a vehicle for emotion. Number 24. Viramati, 1897. Paul Gauguin's immersion in Tahitian mythology finds one of its most evocative manifestations in Viramati, where the artist reinterprets the story of the first woman in the Maori tradition through a deeply personal imagery. The female figure, represented with a hieratic and serene presence, embodies the ideal of purity and fertility, essential aspects in the Polynesian worldview. However, beyond its mythological context, the work is also a meditation on femininity and nature, conceived through the prism of exoticism that Gauguin made the axis of his production during his years in Tahiti. Executed in oil on canvas, the painting is distinguished by its intense chromaticism and synthetic composition, where shapes are defined through planes of color and well-marked contours. The contrast between the warm tones of the skin and the dark background accentuates the mystical aura of the figure, immersing it in a timeless space. Viramati is part of the collection of the Pushkin Museum, where its presence continues to fuel the discussion around Gauguin's vision of the Polynesian world and its impact on later art. Its influence extends to modern and contemporary art, where its fusion between the sacred and the earthly resonates in the exploration of new visual mythologies. Number 23. The White Horse, 1898. In the latter part of his life, Paul Gauguin devoted himself with fervor to the representation of Polynesian exoticism, creating a pictorial language that challenged the norms of his time. The White Horse is a testament to this search for the primal, where the central figure, a steed bathed in light, becomes the bridge between untamed nature and the spirituality of the island. The composition is endowed with an almost mystical calm, in which the human presence is relegated to a secondary role, suggesting the silent communion between the animal and the environment. The work is part of the artist's Tahitian period, when his colors became purer and his forms more simplified, anticipating the abstraction of the 20th century. Executed in oil on canvas, the painting displays a technique that emphasizes the flatness of the colors and the intentional omission of traditional perspective. Gauguin used dense strokes and well-defined contours to intensify the almost dreamlike character of the scene, avoiding the mimetic representation of reality. Beyond the apparent simplicity of the subject, the work contains a strong symbolic charge. The white horse has historically been an emblem of purity and power, but in this Polynesian context it also suggests a link with the sacred. Today, The painting is part of the collection of the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, where it continues to fascinate with its chromatic magnetism. Its influence has extended to multiple generations of modern artists, especially in the Fauvist and Expressionist movements, who found in Gauguin a model of emancipation from academic constraints. Number 22. Under the Pandanus II, 1891. Created shortly after Paul Gauguin's arrival in Tahiti, Under the Pandanus II reflects his first contact with a visual universe that would leave a profound impression on him. Unlike his later works, in which the composition became more symbolic and spiritual, this piece still retains a certain naturalism, albeit filtered through the artist's personal vision. The scene depicts a group of Tahitian women, resting under the protective shade of the pandanus, a tree with long, fibrous leaves that frequently appears in his work. This representation of daily island life suggests a notion of suspended time, where leisure and contemplation take on an almost ritualistic character. Gauguin, with his fervor for the primitive, sought not only to document but also to reinterpret Tahitian culture through his idealized lens. The oil on canvas is characterized by the use of warm, earthy tones, with broad brushstrokes that structure the scene without the need for superfluous details. In this work, Gauguin experiments with the juxtaposition of planes, a visual strategy that eliminates conventional perspective in favor of greater flatness, evoking the aesthetics of the Japanese prints he so admired. The theme is rooted in the myth of the lost paradise, a recurring motif in his work, where nature becomes a refuge and human figures embody a purity that contrasts with the artificiality of the Western world. Today, the work is in the Indianapolis Museum of Art, where it is appreciated as a key piece to understand the evolution of his style. His imprint can be seen in artists such as Matisse and Picasso, who took from him the expressive value of color and the reduction of form to its most vibrant essence. Number 21. The Enchanting Land, Te Nave Nave, Whenua, 1892. At the heart of Gauguin's work is a fascination with the sacred, and the enchanted land is one of its most eloquent manifestations. Created in the early years of his stay in Tahiti, this piece moves away from mere costume-brist representation to enter a universe of mythological resonances. The scene, dominated by a young Tahitian woman reclining in a lush environment, exudes a serene sensuality that refers to the original harmony between man and nature. In the artist's vision, the Polynesian island is not just a landscape, but a magical territory, endowed with a spiritual essence that seeps into every pictorial element. The title, in the Maori language, reinforces this idea of a tangible Eden, where the land is both a physical space and a dimension of wonder. In this work, Gauguin displays his mastery of color, deploying an intense palette where greens and yellows overlap in a luminous symphony. The artist's technique, characterized by the use of large chromatic masses with hardly any tonal transition, amplifies the dreamlike sensation. As in many of his paintings from this period, the absence of shadows and the stylization of the figures give the image a timeless, almost iconographic quality. Today, the work is in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, forming part of one of the most significant collections of Post-Impressionism. Its impact on modern art has been immense, serving as inspiration for the Surrealists and other movements that explored the intersection between the real and the imagined. Number 20. Barbarian Tales, 1902. Created in the last years of his life, Barbarian Tales embodies the exoticism and fascination with Polynesian culture that defined Paul Gauguin's late work. In this painting, the artist, already ill and residing in the Marquesas Islands, transfers to canvas his vision of a primitive and untamed world, captured through intense colors and figures shrouded in an aura of mystery. A twilight atmosphere is perceived, where the female figure in profile and the man with an elusive gaze seem wrapped in a wordless story, an ancestral fable transmitted in images. The scene, although silent, resonates with echoes of local mythology and the artist's own thoughts on Western civilization and its impact on these territories. The work, executed in oil on canvas, displays Gauguin's characteristic post-impressionist technique, with marked brushstrokes and saturated colors that reject realism in favor of expressiveness. The palette of warm, earthy tones gives the scene a sense of the mystical and the alien, underlining the distance between the European vision and the Polynesian reality. Today, Barbarian Tales is in the collection of the Folkwang Museum in Germany, where its presence dialogues with other works of the European avant-garde. Its influence has transcended time, inspiring 20th-century artists such as the German Expressionists, who found in its pictorial language a way to explore the primitive and the subconscious. Number 19. The Loss of Virginity. From the year 1890 to the year 1891. In this work, Paul Gauguin explores the relationship between innocence and transformation through a symbolic representation loaded with meaning. The female figure reclining in a vibrant landscape becomes an enigma. Her naked body, in tension with the serenity of her face, evokes the emotional complexity of sexual awakening. At her feet, a red fox accentuates the ambiguity of the story, introducing an element of danger or cunning that contrasts with the stillness of the scene. The work, painted during the period when Gauguin was searching for his own language beyond Impressionism, reveals his inclination for allegory and pictorial narration through visual codes rooted in the primitive and the instinctive. Executed in oil on canvas, the piece stands out for its use of non-naturalistic colors, a technique the artist employs to intensify the symbolic dimension of the work. The saturated red and blue create a contrast that underlines the psychological tension of the subject. The painting is currently in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., where its presence highlights the dialogue between European art and the influence of non-Western cultures. The Loss of Virginity anticipated key developments in symbolism and expressionism, influencing later movements that explored the psychology of color and formal simplification as a means of accessing the irrational and the spiritual. Number 18. The Moon and the Earth, Hina Te Whatu. 1893. Inspired by the Tahitian myths that captivated Paul Gauguin upon his arrival in Polynesia, The Moon and the Earth, Hina Te Whatu, stands out as one of his most symbolic works, rooted in the local worldview. In this painting, the artist translates into his own visual language the legend of Hina, the moon goddess, and her dialogue with the earth, personified as a male figure. The contrast between the two characters evokes the opposition between the ethereal and the earthly, the eternal and the perishable, reflecting one of the recurring philosophical concerns in Gauguin's work, the struggle between the spiritual and the material. Its composition, with enveloping lines and simplified forms, accentuates the feeling of an archaic story, transmitted through symbols rather than explicit narrative details. Painted in oil on canvas, the work is characterized by its flat surface and expressive use of color, where green and blue tones predominate, evoking the exuberant nature of Tahiti and the mystical connection between its inhabitants and their environment. Today, the piece is part of the collection of the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, a key space for the appreciation of Gauguin's legacy and its impact on modern art. His influence is perceived in the work of artists such as Henri Matisse and the Fauves, who adopted his conception of color as a vehicle of emotion and his search for the primitive as a source of authenticity and artistic purity. Number 17. Woman with a Mango, Vahine no Te V. 1892. Upon his arrival in Tahiti, Paul Gauguin sought to capture in his canvases the pure and primal essence of island life, far removed from Western civilization. Woman with Mango, Vahine no Te V, is a testament to this search, a work in which the painter captures tropical stillness with a pictorial force that goes beyond simple representation. The model, with her hieratic face and absent gaze, becomes an icon of the exotic, while the ripe mango she gently holds suggests a latent sensuality. This work, created during his first trip to Polynesia, is part of his aesthetic revolution, in which synthesis and flatness of color are opposed to European tradition. Gauguin used oil on canvas, applying a palette rich in ochres, greens, and oranges that dialogue with the exoticism of the natural environment. The technique used, based on defined contours and a subjective perspective, refers to the influence of cloisonnism and Japonism, but with a unique chromatic and emotional intensity. The work not only represents the beauty of the Polynesian woman, but also suggests a symbolic universe where nature and the female figure intertwine in an immutable harmony. Currently, Woman with Mango is in the collection of the Baltimore Museum of Art, where it continues to fascinate viewers and artists. Its composition has influenced later movements such as Fauvism and Expressionism, which found in the simplification of form and the arbitrary use of color a way for the pure expression of emotion. Number 16. Words of the Devil, Peru in the Varua Ino. 1892. In this enigmatic work, Paul Gauguin delves into the mysticism and superstition of Polynesian culture, offering a vision full of ambiguity and symbolism. Words of the Devil, Peru in the Varua Ino, depicts a woman in a state of fear or trance, while a spectral presence emerges in the background, generating an air of eerie spirituality. The work reflects the impact of the Tahitian worldview on the artist's imagination, who interpreted his beliefs through a Western lens, fusing the ancestral with his own vision of mystery. This canvas is not only a reflection of his fascination with the occult, but also a pictorial statement that challenges conventional narratives about spirituality and fear. Executed in oil on canvas, Gauguin employs dark, saturated colors that heighten the drama of the scene. The use of an asymmetrical composition and the reduction of space in favor of two-dimensionality create an atmosphere charged with psychological tension. The title itself, a reference to the word transmitted from the spiritual world, suggests the existence of an unknown voice that resonates in the human consciousness. Words of the Devil is currently in the Indianapolis Museum of Art, where it continues to attract the attention of scholars of symbolism and artistic ethnography. Its bold treatment of mystery and the supernatural influenced the expressionist explorations of the 20th century, opening the door to a painting in which emotion and subjective perception take center stage. Number 15. Madame Moi, Once Upon a Time. 1892. In Madame Moi, Once Upon a Time, Gauguin transports the viewer to an idealized world, a lost paradise where life takes place in harmony with nature. The scene, imbued with an almost mythical stillness, shows a group of Tahitian women engaged in a ritual that evokes ancient times. Inspired by nostalgia for the primitive and his desire to escape European modernity, the painter constructs a timeless vision that borders on myth. The title reinforces this intention by suggesting a legendary tale, as if the canvas were the materialization of a collective memory. Technically, the work stands out for its masterful use of color, with a predominance of vibrant yellows and oranges that flood the landscape, contrasting with the deep greens of the vegetation. The brushwork is loose but precise, giving the figures a monumental, almost sculptural presence. Gauguin reduces traditional perspective to emphasize the flatness of the composition, creating a sense of unreality that reinforces the mythical character of the scene. Madame Moi is currently part of a private collection, and its exhibition has been intermittent, which has not prevented its impact from transcending the history of art. Its conception of the lost paradise has been taken up by multiple artists of the 20th century, from the surrealists to the postmoderns, consolidating its status as an essential work in the evolution of modern art. Number 14. The Market, Thomas Tate. 1892. This work, inspired by the everyday life of French Polynesia, emerges from the profound impact that Maori culture had on Paul Gauguin after his arrival in Tahiti. With a fascinated eye for the exotic and a vehement desire to get away from Western civilization, the artist took references from both European urban scenes and Egyptian frescoes to represent a group of women lined up in a local market. The rigidity in the arrangement of the figures and their hieratic frontality evoke ancient pharaonic representations, giving the work a ritual solemnity, in contrast with the exuberant nature that frames it. The technique used by Gauguin in this piece is characteristic of his synthetic style: pure, flat colors, well-defined lines, and a reduced perspective that emphasizes the two-dimensionality of the composition. The symbolism of the work is ambiguous, oscillating between admiration for the Tahitian world and the disturbing influence of colonialism. The women in the market, although apparently relaxed, convey a sense of distance and impassivity, as if they were mere shadows of an idealized paradise. Today, this painting is kept at the Kunstmuseum Basel, where it is exhibited as an essential testimony to the modernist longing for a return to primitive purity. Its rhythmic arrangement and reinterpretation of exoticism influenced artists such as Henri Matisse and the German Expressionists, who embraced its simplification of forms and vibrant color palette. Number 13. Fatata te Midi, by the Sea. 1892. Upon arriving in Tahiti, Gauguin found in the relationship between the island's inhabitants and nature an inexhaustible source of inspiration. Fatata te Midi is one of his first Tahitian works in which he expresses his fascination with naked bodies in communion with the landscape. Two female figures emerge from the undergrowth, walking towards the crystalline waters, suggesting an idyllic harmony between humans and their environment. The composition is reminiscent of classical mythological scenes, but the artist's gaze replaces academic solemnity with a carefree and vibrant sensuality. The brushstrokes are bold, and the chromatic saturation brings the blue of the ocean and the green of the vegetation to an almost unreal intensity, as if the canvas were capturing a dreamlike moment. The warm and luminous atmosphere reinforces the idea of a virgin land, still free from the hand of colonialism. Behind the apparent spontaneity of the painting, Gauguin introduces a play of contrasts: European civilization and the primitive world, culture and nature, nostalgia and idealization. Today, the work is part of the collection of the National Gallery of Art. Gallery of Art in Washington, where he continues to captivate those who seek in his stroke the essence of the wild. His influence resonates in the post-impressionist and fauvist movements, which inherited his vibrant palette and introspective approach to exoticism. Number 12. The Orana Maria, Hail Mary. 1891. Conceived shortly after his arrival in Tahiti, La Orana Maria is a reinterpretation of Christian iconography in a Polynesian key. Gauguin, whose Western education could not be separated from religious symbolism, imagines here a Virgin and Child Jesus enveloped in the colors and gestures of the local culture. The central figures, adorned with colorful sarongs and prostrate on the ground, are presented by an angel with bright yellow wings, a vision that transforms dogma into something tangible, almost earthly. This visual syncretism reflects the clash between imposed Christianity and the ancestral beliefs of the Tahitian people, a recurring theme in the artist's work. The painting's technique is expressive and deliberately primitive. Contours are confidently drawn, colors are arranged in wide, flat fields, and spatial depth is reduced in favor of a more ornamental composition. Every element, from the trees framing the scene to the reverential figures, is imbued with symbolic presence. Today, this painting is in the Musée d'Orsay, where it stands as a manifesto of Gauguin's search for an authentic spirituality, removed from European rationalism. His bold fusion of the religious and the exotic deeply impacted the symbolists and, later, the surrealists, who saw in his visual language a way of transcending the barriers of conventional representation. Number 11. Self-Portrait with Halo and Snake. 1889. Painted at a time of intense spiritual and personal searching, Self-Portrait with Halo and Snake stands as a testament to Paul Gauguin's internal struggle between virtue and temptation. Created after his stay in Pont-Aven, the artist presents his own image as a mystical being, between the sacred and the profane. The snake, a symbol of forbidden knowledge, coils around his hand, evoking the myth of original sin, while the golden halo seems to give him an enlightened character. At this time, Gauguin was moving away from the academic tradition and immersing himself in symbolism, endowing his work with a visual language charged with meaning. Executed with a vibrant and contrasting palette, the work is characterized by the use of flat colors and marked contours, a technique influenced by the cloisonnism of Émile Bernard. His brushstrokes do not seek realistic precision, but rather an expressiveness that accentuates its symbolic charge. Exhibited at the National Museum of Western Art in Tokyo, this piece has become a point of reference for understanding Gauguin's artistic identity. His exploration of self-representation influenced later generations, from the German Expressionists to the avant-garde of the 20th century, who found in his work a way to transcend appearance to explore the artist's psyche. Number 10. Two Tahitian Women. 1899. In Two Tahitians, Gauguin portrays the serenity and exotic beauty of life in Polynesia, a universe that he idealized as a refuge from the decadence of Western civilization. Created in his last period in Tahiti, the painting embodies the artist's idyllic vision of primitive life, free of artifice and close to nature. However, beneath the apparent tranquility of the scene, there lies a subtle eroticism and a westernizing gaze that has been the subject of multiple critical interpretations. The duality of the women, one holding flowers while the other observes with an enigmatic expression, suggests a metaphor for desire and innocence, recurring themes in his Polynesian production. The work, executed with loose brushwork and warm colors, is notable for its balanced composition and the sensuality of the figures, in which Gauguin does away with traditional modeling in favor of flat surfaces of color. It is currently in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, where it continues to fascinate the public with its enigmatic simplicity. Its influence can be traced to the work of Henri Matisse and other Fauves, who found in the exaltation of color and the simplification of forms a starting point for the pictorial liberation that would mark the evolution of modern art. Number 9. The Seed of the Arioi, Te A no Aria. 1892. The Seed of the Arioi is a key work in Paul Gauguin's Tahitian production, in which he expresses his interpretation of Polynesian mythology with a fusion of the imagined and the real. Inspired by oral accounts of the secret society of the Arioi, a brotherhood of warriors and artists dedicated to the veneration of Oro, the god of love, Gauguin recreates a scene of great symbolic charge. The central figure, a woman with golden skin and an introspective expression, holds a flower as if it carried the very essence of fertility and destiny. At her side, a male figure seems to embody the silent presence of divinity or of the latent desire in the culture that the artist idealized. The canvas is characterized by its use of deep tones and its arrangement of planes of pure color, a resource that Gauguin perfected during his years in Polynesia. The figures have an almost sculptural presence, highlighted by lighting that suggests a world outside of time, between the earthly and the sacred. Currently housed in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, this work has been fundamental to the development of modern art, influencing artists such as Picasso and the primitivists of the 20th century, who found in Gauguin's stylization a way to break with traditional representation and explore new forms of visual expression. Number 8. The Day of the God, Mahana no Atua, 1894. At the height of his creative maturity, Paul Gauguin conceived Mahana no Atua, a work that encapsulates his search for a spiritual paradise alien to Western civilization. This piece was created during his stay in Tahiti, at a time when the artist, disenchanted with European modernity, was exploring Polynesian myths and rituals with the intention of recovering the primordial purity of art. The scene presents a wooden deity, inspired by Maori sculptures, dominating the composition from the center, while the human characters, distributed in bands of color, seem to articulate a ritualistic narrative. In this canvas, Gauguin does not limit himself to documenting. In his desire for transcendence, he reconstructs a mystical imaginary with dreamlike overtones. The technique employed in this work is oil on canvas, executed in his distinctive cloisonnism, where dark contours and areas of pure color give the scene a sculptural character. The vibrant, unnaturalistic palette evokes the artist's symbolic vision rather than a faithful reproduction of reality. Mahana no Atua is a meditation on the sacred and ritual life, where the central goddess emerges as an immutable presence in the face of ephemeral human existence. Today, this work is part of the collection of the Chicago Art Museum, from where its aesthetic has permeated the evolution of expressionism and symbolism in modern painting, inspiring later artists such as André Derain and Henri Matisse. Number 7. Ariarea, 1892. During his second stay in Tahiti, Paul Gauguin conceived Ariarea, a manifesto of his idealized vision of Polynesian life, freed from the shackles of industrial progress. This painting captures a moment of serenity in a world that the artist imagined still unchanged, where the harmony between humanity and nature remains intact. The composition stands out for its structure on different planes. In the foreground, two women dressed in colorful sarongs converse in a relaxed manner, while a red dog occupies the center of the image, defying the chromatic conventions of the time. Beyond, a procession of figures enters a green space, as if responding to a mystical call, suggesting a worldview in which the earthly and the divine are intertwined. In this work, Gauguin displays a refined technique based on the use of oil on canvas with intense colors, applied in solid planes and delimited with marked lines, evoking the aesthetics of primitive art. The chromatic saturation gives a dreamlike atmosphere to the scene, in which the symbolism of the dog and the arrangement of the characters refer to a latent spiritual universe. Ariarea is in the Musée d'Orsay, in Paris, where his influence on the avant-garde movements of the 20th century was decisive, serving as a reference for movements such as Fauvism, which found in his colors a source of visceral and emotional expression. Number 6. Tahitian Women on the Beach, 1891. Newly arrived in Tahiti, Paul Gauguin captured in Tahitian Women on the Beach a moment of contemplative calm, far from the hustle and bustle of Western life. This work, which marks the beginning of his immersion in Polynesian exoticism, portrays two young women sitting on the sand, lost in thoughts that seem alien to the viewer's presence. With a gaze that oscillates between melancholy and introspection, the women represent the dichotomy between the placidity of island existence and the latent tension caused by European colonization. The background, defined by the line of the sea and a calm horizon, accentuates the sensation of stillness and absorption, giving the scene an aura of mystery. Oil on canvas allowed Gauguin to experiment with a technique in which the simplification of forms and the juxtaposition of flat colors replaced traditional modeling. The color range, dominated by ochres and blues, gives the work a serene character, while the economy of elements reinforces its meditative quality. Tahitian Women on the Beach is now part of the collection of the Musée d'Orsay, where it stands as a testimony to the artist's transition towards his definitive pictorial language. Its aesthetic has notably influenced artists such as Pablo Picasso and Henri Matisse, who saw in Gauguin's work a way to renew modern art through simplification and expressiveness of color. Number 5. When Will You Get Married? Nafia Faa Poipo. 1892. At a time when the Western gaze idealized the exotic, Paul Gauguin arrived in Tahiti with the ambition of capturing a reality still unexplored by European painting. When Will You Get Married? Is a testament to his fascination with a world that, in his perception, had not yet been corrupted by modernity. In this work, the artist presents two female figures, one in a contemplative position and the other with an inquisitive gesture that questions the viewer, embodying the clash between tradition and change. The painting is not only a reflection of his experience on the island, but also a work that, over time, would become one of the most coveted on the art market. The oil on canvas is defined by its vibrant palette and bold use of color, a hallmark of Post-Impressionism that Gauguin took to its fullest expression. The superposition of flat tones and the absence of mottled shadows reinforce the sense of timelessness and evoke the influence of Japanese art on his work. Beyond the technique, the scene contains a profound symbolic charge. The gesture of the young woman dressed in pink alludes to the tradition of arranged marriages in Tahitian culture, while the presence of the other figure, with her melancholic gaze, seems to embody uncertainty about the future. Today, the work has been part of private collections and prestigious museums, consolidating itself as an icon of modern art. Its influence extends to generations of artists who found in Gauguin's color and formal simplification an inexhaustible source of aesthetic exploration. Number 4. The Spirit of the Dead Watches. 1892. Paul Gauguin's contact with the Tahitian worldview marked a fundamental turning point in his artistic production, evidenced in The Spirit of the Dead Watching. The work was born in a context of anxiety and fascination when, according to the painter's own accounts, he found his young wife, Tahaamana, motionless and terrified in the darkness of her room. Inspired by this scene, he transferred to the canvas a vision that oscillates between reality and dreamlike, evoking an atmosphere of mysticism rooted in local beliefs about the presence of spirits. The work is a testament to his desire to capture not only the daily life of the island, but also its myths and superstitions. The composition stands out for its treatment of color, where the contrasts between yellow and violet create a feeling of unease, intensified by the tense posture of the female figure. The dense brushwork and the use of flat tones refer to the formal simplification that characterized his style, emphasizing the two-dimensionality of space. The specter that rises behind the young woman, dressed in a dark sarong, is a symbol of death in Polynesian tradition, although its interpretation remains open to multiple readings. Exhibited in important museums throughout the 20th century, the work consolidated the exploration of the supernatural in modern art, and its influence can be seen in the symbolism of artists such as Edvard Munch and Emil Nolde, who took fear and anguish to new pictorial dimensions. Number 3. The Yellow Christ. 1889. At the heart of Paul Gauguin's religious symbolism, the Yellow Christ emerges as one of his most enigmatic and personal creations. Inspired by a carved wooden crucifix he found in the Breton region of Pont-Aven, the artist transfigured the traditional image of Christ into an icon of modernity, linked to popular spirituality and beliefs rooted in the folklore of the area. In this reinterpretation, the figure of Jesus is removed from suffering to acquire a static and almost mystical presence, where the intensity of color replaces the drama of expression. The choice of yellow, with its golden and luminous tone, not only reinforces the idea of divinity, but also connects the work with the symbolism of color in Gauguin's thought. By applying a technique of thick contours and flat colors, the painter breaks away from naturalistic representation to create a scene that borders on the visionary. The Breton peasant women surrounding the cross seem indifferent to the sacrifice, as if they perceived it not as a historical fact, but as a constant presence in their daily lives. Currently housed in the Albright Knox Art Gallery, the work had a notable impact on Expressionism, influencing the way in which Christian iconography was reinterpreted by avant-garde artists in the 20th century. Number 2. Vision After the Sermon. Jacob Wrestling with the Angel. 1888. The impact of Paul Gauguin's stay in Breton on his work is powerfully condensed in Vision After the Sermon, a piece in which the fusion of the real and the spiritual breaks with the traditional canons of Western painting. Inspired by the rustic devotion of the peasants of Pont-Aven, Gauguin captures the moment when the women, fresh from church, project their faith into a mystical vision. The composition, radical in its use of color and in its separation between the earthly and transcendental planes, is an affirmation of the artist's symbolist quest. The work moves away from the prevailing naturalism and gives way to a universe where the perception of the world is filtered by the subjectivity of the spirit. Technically, the painting is a bold exploration of flat, arbitrary colors, with a deep red dominating the scene and stripping the landscape of any pretense of realism. The influence of Japanese printmaking is evident in the arrangement of elements and the absence of traditional perspective, which underlines the two-dimensionality of the canvas. The struggle of Jacob and the angel, depicted in the upper corner, is more than a biblical scene. It is the inner conflict between the mundane and the divine, a struggle that the viewer witnesses from a distance. The work is currently in the National Gallery of Art, New York, USA. Gallery of Scotland, where it stands as a milestone of Post-Impressionism. Its bold use of color and formal simplification would influence the Nabi generation and artists such as Matisse, who found in its symbolism a key to free painting from the shackles of visual mimesis. Number 1. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? 1897. Paul Gauguin's greatest work is, without a doubt, Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? A pictorial testament in which the artist expresses his philosophical vision in a visual narrative of disturbing depth. Painted in Tahiti, where Gauguin sought refuge from the Western world, the scene unfolds in a panoramic format that imitates an archaic frieze, proposing a reading from left to right as the inevitable transition of existence. This work was conceived in a state of anguish, when the artist was facing personal and economic crises, and he considered it his last great declaration before attempting to take his own life. The composition, structured in different episodes of human life, is a meditation on the transience and mystery of existence, in which nature and the human figure merge in a dreamlike setting. The color palette, dominated by ochre and blue tones, refers to the warmth of the Tahitian land and the introspective spirit of the work. Gauguin dispenses with traditional perspective to create a sense of timelessness, in which the characters seem to exist in a simultaneous and absolute space. Symbolism is found in every gesture and object. The child figure refers to birth, while the bent old woman alludes to the inevitability of death. The painting, currently housed in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, is one of the most enigmatic of post-impressionism and has been a reference for 20th-century artists such as Picasso and Kandinsky, who found in its symbolic charge and in its treatment of color a bridge to abstraction and modern art. Thank you for watching our video. Subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Give it a like, comment your thoughts, and share this video with your friends and family.